Welcome back. Thank you very much for staying with us. Now we continue with our water focus. We're now joined by Professor Lucia Anelich, a food safety expert. Good evening, Professor. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. Now, the issue of water pollution and its impact on food security has become a great concern, be it the reliance on pesticides on the part of those in the agricultural industry or improper sewage disposal. Just talk to us about the extent that pollution has on compromising our food security if it's not dealt with in a matter decisively, rather.
Good evening, Mfundo, and to your viewers. Water pollution is a huge problem because it is used for so many reasons. I mean, without water, we cannot exist. So we use it for drinking, obviously, and we use it for food processing, most definitely. So every single manufacturing facility where food is being manufactured and processed uses water. And that water has to be safe for that use. And so not only the availability of water, but also the quality and the safety is really important.
Now, when we're having experts raising or sounding the alarm now, are they not being alarmists, or is this matter now at a crisis level where it is compromising the kind of water that we use for livestock?
Livestock is not that important in terms of quality and safety of water, but for crops and irrigation of crops, it's really, really important, because any water that contains a certain sewage could be contaminated with all sorts of other bacteria that could harm people that would be eating those crops, especially if those crops are going to be consumed raw, like lettuce leaves or tomatoes and things like that. So it is absolutely crucial that the water, irrigation water that we use for those crops is of a good quality.
Now, if we look at the agricultural sector, their reliance on pesticides and fertilizers, these are said to also pose a serious threat to the quality of the water. But when I was speaking to a water expert a bit earlier on, he spoke about possibly looking into alternatives or growing some of this food organically. But is this cost effective?
That's the problem. Organic production is wonderful if one can sustain it. But we need to feed over 9 billion people shortly by the year 2050. It's not so far away. And we know that we cannot do that with organic production. Organic production will always be a niche market. And so, unfortunately, it's not going to sustain the lives on the planet.
So what needs to happen then? Because are there perhaps some sort of alternatives that can be used to some of these very harmful pesticides and fertilizers?
Well, there is a big move across the world to try and reuse water. So not just dispose the water that was used once and put it back into the rivers or lakes or dams or whatever the case may be, but actually to, as a facility, to reuse the water in such a way that it is still safe to do so. So this brings across a whole lot of different hazards that we have to look at. It's not only pesticides and fertilizers, but it's certainly microorganisms, because you certainly don't want microorganisms in the water to come back into the production facility, and now you're recontaminating food with bacteria that you don't want in the food. So there's a lot of work being done at international level to see how can we do this better.
Then on the aquatic food sources, water pollution is also said to affect the aquatic ecosystem and subsequently the availability of seafood. Can we just expand on this one here?
Yes, well, water in the sea, in the oceans and in the sea systems are particularly concerning in terms of heavy metals. And so you've got this whole chain of fish and larger fish and smaller fish that eat one another, and then you get right up into the food chain, which becomes the human who then eats the fish. And so that those heavy metals are conveyed or transferred to us when we consume those foods. And we are particularly worried about things like lead, cadmium, and mercury. And so there are certain areas in the seas that we know of that we have to try and be very careful of when we go fishing, and making sure that we don't take fish from those areas where they are heavily polluted.
So what is the position that government needs to take now to ensure that the food we are consuming is safe?
Well, food safety, for a start, has to become a priority in government. And unfortunately, that is not the case. So food safety we see as a foodborne illness problem. It goes much, much further than that. When food is unsafe, it creates a problem with food security, and it creates a problem certainly with public health, because food safety is a public health issue, just as much as tuberculosis and malaria and other similar diseases are. We
because
just
it
don't
drains the health system because we're constantly ill and constantly at hospitals.
Correct. And so when you are ill from a foodborne disease, you've got diarrhea or you vomit, or you might get very, very seriously ill and die. This is a public health issue, and we have to give it that priority. We have to elevate it to that priority.
And some have even argued that it's an economic issue, because if you have a sickly society, you have very few people at work.
Totally. And also we know that foodborne illness suppresses the immune system. So that makes you susceptible to all sorts of other illnesses as well. So it's not just a simple thing of, oh, I feel bad for 2 to 3 days and I'll be fine. It is definitely, as you say, an economic issue, because you're not going to go to work, you stay home, and if you are ill, you go to hospital. It costs medical facilities money to heal you, to treat you, etc. If you add all of those costs together, it is a lot of money. It's millions a year that are actually spent.
Indeed, but at least on our side on Full View, we will continue with this conversation and speak to authorities on what exactly they plan to do to ensure that the food we consume is safe, because as you say, it's costly to our economy, it's costly to our health system, and most certainly we all want to be healthy. But thank you very much, Professor, for joining us this evening. That was water, or rather safety, food safety expert, Professor Lucia Anelich.